In the program Current Affairs, now we bring you a discussion on current economic scenario. The participants are V. Raghuraman, former Secretary General ASSOCHAM, Shubhamay Bhattacharjee, Deputy Editor, Indian Express, and Aditi Phadnis, Business Standard, who initiates and moderates the discussion.
The Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, gave a statement in the two houses of Parliament today on the current economic situation and was in the Rajya Sabha at his combative best. He is not known to be tough, but he asked the opposition some really tough questions about their role in the management of India's economic crisis and said that reform can only take place if there is consensus on it. India can go forward only if there is consensus on this. Shubhamay, I'd like to ask you first, what do you think was the basis of the Prime Minister's somewhat optimistic assertion that India will respond as a man and things will very soon come back to normal in the Indian economy?
Yeah, Aditi, I think the PM's statement itself is quite comfortable for just one point that he made, which is that the rupee should be allowed to go down to the way it is to take care of the way the Indian economy's problems and the domestic and the world economy is unfolding. So that's perfectly okay. But yes, for him to say that the Indian economy will recover fast is frankly something that, after all, he has to say because he is the leader of the team which is there, and they have to take on the position that this is where we expect the economy would turn around. But frankly speaking, as of now, other than expectations in terms of things having started moving, there are very few.
So let's look at what the PM has said India will not do, although he conceded that there is a crisis, but he said some things India will not do. One of them is imposing capital controls, which means that investors will find that their repatriation of their earnings will not be permitted to be sent abroad. This always strikes terror in the heart of any investor, understandably, because if he cannot send his earnings abroad, there's no point in earning any money in India, and this would have been a great dampener to investor sentiment. The Prime Minister has said this will not happen under any circumstances. He has also said that whatever reform has been undertaken will not be overturned. This also is a very important signal to investors. Mr. Raghuraman, do you feel that the time is past for these kind of statements, or do they still have some meanings?
See, the question is that this week has been pretty bad, especially there's been triple whammy. You had the food security bill, you had the land acquisition bill, and now you had the Syrian crisis and the oil prices shooting up. Surely this effect has had on the rupee, and it has really been tumbling. Surely there is a case in point that rupee should have corrected itself fine, but the point is the manner in which these jolts have occurred requires some sort of statement from the Prime Minister with regard to the kind of direction in which the government is taking and going, and it's a good thing that the Prime Minister came out and candidly actually talked about the current real crisis-like situation and also what are the external and internal factors which have been doing this. But the point is very clear that we don't have quick fix solutions. Surely it's going to be a long drawn out affair. But the comforting points are, as you rightly pointed out, that yes, capital controls will not be brought back and reforms will not be backtracked. Okay. But doesn't mean that we have got over our procedural and compliance issues which are dogging this government for long, and we have not been able to move forward in actually getting investments, and that's where the real challenge is as to how we will be able to repair the economy by getting investments in the short run, and also fix some of the problems like getting coal production really on, because that's something under our control, and also iron ore exports restarted so that we are able to see that the pressure on the foreign exchange outgoes will be reduced. In fact, this is what is something which he can do right now.
Shubhamay, one of the things that has been dogging, as Mr. Raghuraman rightly said, has been the issue of coal pooling. And the fact that our power projections for the power sector have not been adequately met by availability of coal. Now, the Cabinet Committee on Investment had taken some decisions to allow the Coal India to import a certain amount of coal, which will at least address the shortage of coal for the 75,000 megawatt additional capacity that was added in the last 2 years. But the issue of coal generally has been dogged not just by shortages but also by judicial pronouncements, which has really confused things. Now, it's true that imported coal will be more expensive and will therefore push up the per unit cost or the tariff of power. But on the whole, how do you see this issue of coal playing out?
In fact, price pooling, you just now talked about the issue over that PM and said reforms will not be rolled back. I think price pooling is the biggest rollback of reform, as I see it at the current stage. It's a socialist throwback. You import a certain amount of coal, ask a company to set up a pan-national system of distributing that coal. It just doesn't make any sense, which is why the CIL board of directors, its shareholders, have both been saying that we are uncomfortable with it. And the Cabinet Committee has also found that there will not be any takers, which is why they have sort of decided to abandon it. Instead, let the companies try to figure out how they will go with coal. And Aditi, you're right about the fact that it is something which didn't come on us suddenly. It's been building up over the years. The point was that we didn't try to take on issues. I think that's where the problem is. That it's not a question of reforms being rolled back, it's simply that the reforms haven't happened for a long time. So there isn't any question of rolling back. We are not going ahead trying to do what needs to be done. It's not a one-off process that you do it and then you stand and then you hang around and see what happens. Governments have to administrative to keep on doing things which allow an economy of the complexity and scale that is India to be able to take on new challenges. That simply wasn't happening.
But Mr. Raghuram, the Prime Minister has said that the reform which had to be done has already been done. What needs to be done now requires consensus. He has alluded specifically to the reform in the pension and insurance sector. He has spoken about other reform, which is reform basically through legislation, which we all know requires consensus. Now, where do you think we are heading on that front?
Actually, we need to have more understanding on whether the entire country as a whole, that economy is something very important for us and we should go ahead to see that the investments come in. And for that, definitely government has to really put in extra effort to really bring a better consensus. And this was happening 20 years back. I do not know why we cannot have the same thing happening right now. And we need to understand that unless we do that, I think it is going to be very difficult. So this is a time of national crisis and emergency, and it is for the political leadership to have sagacity, understand the problems which are there, and see what all can be done to actually boost up investor sentiments. Today what is happening is we are throwing back all investments, we are throwing back everybody. The kind of thing which you have put in the land acquisition bill is going to deter still more kinds of investments, because the reason is people are worried about delays and also costs. So I think these are many of the things which are imponderables right today, and it's very difficult whether we will be able to move forward without these, as you mentioned, the pension regulatory bill as well as the case of the insurance, especially insurance opening up. I think if we do that, it's possible for us to attract some capital. But with respect to the other sectors, surely you require more governmental interdepartmental coordination, and Prime Minister rightly said he has to see that the states come on board.
Shubhamay, Mr. Raghuram just referred to states coming on board. The Prime Minister has also referred to the goods and services tax. As you know, the goods and services tax is a primary concern, especially among investors who want to invest in the retail space. Unless there is a uniform tax across India, retailers will find it very difficult to rationalize tax, and given the fungibility of Indian borders in the states, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to be able to maximize their profits if the rates of taxation differ from state to state. Already weighed down by so many other considerations, the retail sector is just not taking off since the opening up of the sector. Now, what is your prescription for GST?
GST will not happen now. There's no point saying that it can happen in 2014, because we simply are unprepared now. The constitutional amendment bills ready and there isn't any indication that they'll go through. The standing committee has already said that they want a GST fund to be set up, and the finance ministry is pretty opposed to that. So there's no way that hump can be crossed right now. So GST is definitely not something that this government can do. I don't understand why it's very nice for the Prime Minister or anybody to say that now they're throwing it back at the opposition that you guys stopped us. But all the major problems that have happened with this government happened within the government. Coal, the opposition never had any issue. Even the coalition partners never had any issue. Petroleum sector problems, as Raghuram pointed out, that also never had any coalition issue. It was something that the Congress created for itself and shot through itself. And similarly for telecom. Telecom, the collateral damage was a problem, constituents of the problem was DMK. But the telecom problem per se wasn't created because Manmohan Singh wasn't simply on the watch. So it's a problem here that has been created by the Congress government by itself, the UPV's main partner. It is they simply stopped doing the major things, and that is where the troubles are.
Well, I wouldn't totally agree with you. I think the problem has also been that the opposition has not allowed. Some problems are inevitably created by partners. We saw that in the NDA government also. Partners have their own agendas, they have their own aims, and they have their own objectives. But the problem was, I think, that the impression that went out that the everyday parliament was being stalled, every day no work was being done, and we are consciously accepting the fact that the current crisis before the government is a crisis of sentiment. It's not a crisis of fundamentals, it's not a crisis of macro conditions, it is a crisis of sentiment. The government was not able to bat with an even, stable bat because Parliament was not allowed to function at all. So the impression that went out was that it's a completely clueless government which has done nothing, whereas in fact, I think that is at variance with the facts. Mr. Raghuram, what would you say?
Actually, main point is that unfortunately the positives really go into the background. The reason is very clear, that the government has not been able to properly trumpet its own strengths. But all the weaknesses have come out, and also the policy paralysis has happened because once you find that there are certain things, the entire sectors get really derailed, like the case of telecom, like the case of coal. Now, if you look at other countries, if you have any of those, surely you find that the people will be fined, the corporates will be fined, but the business goes on. And there is no disruption in business, there is no disruption in investments, but here the bureaucracy is a standstill because nobody is taking decisions. We are talking about investments are not happening in the public sector. Unless investments happen in the public sector, private sector investments will not be forthcoming. And then only the foreign investments will follow. But we are talking about foreign investments without actually putting our own things in house in order. Now what prevents Coal India from producing more, or railways to produce the right kind of linkages? We do not understand, because it's not the question of not having funds. There are enough funds to go around. But the point is we are not taking the right kind of decisions in time, and also each one is saying he's working very hard, they may be efficient, but they have not been effective. In fact, we would say the government has not been effective in understanding and also in translating and transmitting these kinds of issues to the general public the right manner, and also to go ahead with decision making. But we find that whatever we do not have any solutions, and if not now, at least for the days to come or the years to come. I think we need to actually put some stop to this kind of conjecture that yes, what we say we do, and we are able to do. In fact, execution has been the biggest casualty. We talk about reforms. We need to see whatever reforms have been already promised and also what has been really on the ground, we actually are able to implement them. We are not able to implement.
But I would not agree with you. For instance, if last year somebody had told me that India is going to dismantle its diesel subsidy, I would have laughed in their face. The fact is that however incremental a way, the diesel subsidy is being dismantled. Similarly, there is some movement on the subsidy on petroleum. Similarly, there is a rationalization of food subsidy. Now, you may not agree with the fact that the way it's being done is wrong. You may agree or you may not agree, but the fact is they're doing something. Something is happening.
No, but fine. The question is, those subsidies are the kinds of things that you pointed out. Fine. They may be in the right direction. But the point is, it is not which is actually giving you the right kind of sentiment for the investments to occur because decisions are pending, not because of any lack of policy. Policies are there. They are not getting executed and implemented.
Shubhamay, Lehman fell. There are so many financial consultancies, so many banks which have failed. In India, not a single bank has failed. We are totally capitalized. There's no problem with any bank, and it is the great triumph of our public sector banking that nothing so far has gone wrong with any of our banks. What would you say about the banking sector?
I think we are coming to a major crisis on. I'll tell you why. It's not because we are discussing crisis, but simply because with the NPA, gross NPA at 3.8 and restructured assets at 5 point something, it's something like coming closer to 10% of all investment. So public sector banks are really running the thin edge of the thin end of the wedge, and also because now their treasury income will get wiped out because of the rupee gyrations, no fault of theirs. Essentially, their profit comes down. The fact that they have huge NPA and restructured would mean that they would need to set away corresponding amount of capital, which would mean that their ability to find fresh capital would be at a premium. And our fresh capital has to come from government because they are all public sector banks. So the government then again has to step into the breach. The government has a fiscal deficit concern. If it has to step into the breach, that fiscal deficit will be breached. So frankly, that is possibly looming somewhere. We don't know how close it is, but it is looking fairly messy as the days goes on. And it's not something that is unusual for India. No party, whichever party comes along, would have had this problem, simply because when an economy goes into a downturn, banks as the barometer of the economy would be affected.
Most of the NPAs are in the power sector, and you find that already many of the projects are stalled, and unless we are able to get this moving, we will find only the silver lining is that with respect to the imported coal, the Tata Power and Adani's have been given some sort of a relief, saying that yes, they can renegotiate. But these are issues which actually are not allowing the banks to actually reduce their NPAs or actually provide more funds for the infrastructure sector. I think this is what we need to understand.
The biggest confidence boosting measure that came last year was when Chidambaram took over as finance minister. And that's one clear message that really people liked. The problem is that even for him, the laundry list is so long that it's becoming difficult and the time of the government is coming to an end. You made a very major point about the subsidy reforms. That's been something good. And that's exactly what I'm saying, that there are lots of things that could be done, that can be done from within the government, which isn't too much of a problem in terms of despite the usual noise that happens around, it may not be too difficult to have undertaken. But I would say that essentially there's no doubt about it that the Lehman crisis and all those created a situation which was tricky. Luckily, we got away with a V-shaped recovery in 2010-11, and it sort of stretched on into 11-12. That was the time when this government could have built up a huge amount of countervailing measures in terms of building up reserves, in terms of allowing the inflation to be cut back. That was something that they sort of slept on their watch.
Well, the Prime Minister has recounted some of the things that the government did, which could have made the crisis worse but did not. And he has, among them, recounted liberalization norms for foreign direct investment, especially resolution of some tax issues of concern to industry, and, as I said, fuel subsidy reform. But I think liberalizing FDI norms has not brought us the kind of cheer that it could have. Mr. Agraman, what do you think is the reason for this?
No, the main point is very clear. It's a question of sentiment. Like the Vodafone case, retrospective ways of actually looking at things, the manner in which Kane Energy is not given actually enough permission to actually go ahead and actually go for the expanded production lines. Similarly, with the case of, let us take on the case of this oil exploration, I think we need to have more proactive policies which are not forthcoming. That means sentiments.
Shubhamay, what do you say to that?
I think FDI was a very good move. It helps. The point is, there isn't too much of loose cash going around. So that would definitely, first of all, be an impact. Secondly, FDI takes time to come in. It's an investment that takes time to build in. So obviously, there's not much that people can put in and expect to make a change. I'm not sure whether the sentiment factor is as bad as it is made out. What is happening is, I can also understand what's happening from the government's point of view. When times go wrong, everybody has a habit of saying that, look, everything is being made out to be wrong. So it is difficult sometimes to clear up what is really wrong and what are the simply personal problems, issues of companies, which are being sort of given the color of a major systemic crisis. I don't think everything that has been pointed is a systemic crisis. But then it comes with a turf. When a government is in trouble, then people put everything at its door. And that is exactly what is happening. It probably would be a good idea if the Prime Minister's statement, for instance, about the rupee had come a few weeks ago, that fine, we are comfortable with the rupee's decline. It is not something to be scared about. If he had put this up front, probably the RBI could have been stopped from taking the measures that it took eventually.
It's quite extraordinary that the issue of the rupee should be such a big issue, given the fact that even in the last 2 days, the rupee has recovered by almost 2 rupees, which is not a small sum of money.
Yeah.
It has recovered by almost 2 rupees. I think it's quite extraordinary that people should have managed to pull it back from that level. But let's come to the other problem which is staring the government in the face, which is much more difficult to handle. And that is the issue of inflation, something the Prime Minister also referred to. Let's consider the issue of CPI and WPI and exactly what that means for inflation. Dr. Agraman, how do you think the government can handle this?
See that the food grains, especially cereals, especially with the good monsoon which you have had, and also vegetables and onions, as they say, if the prices really will come down after the harvest. So it definitely is possible that the inflation will come down in the coming months, because that's where the real problem is. But with respect to the case of this, let's take oil, because you look at the type of international prices shooting up, and if they stay at this level, surely it's going to be a greater problem for the government, and how long they can hold on by not actually revising the rates, because even today petrol is under pressure. So I think the entire thing will depend on, that's why the Prime Minister has rightly said that we should be able to curb the consumption of oil. And one silver lining is here, because of the good monsoon, our hydro reservoirs are full. So we don't have to have so much of demand for diesel. To that extent, there will be diesel demand depression. So that's possible, maybe, that we will be able to contain consumption growth of petroleum products to a certain extent this year. But I think it's not going to be easy to contain non-food inflation, especially coming out of petroleum imports.
I would just like, Shubhamai, for you to clarify, it's just not a non-food inflation which is a problem. Now, with the depreciation of the rupee and the fact that we import a large amount of pulses and edible oils, it's actually food inflation, which could also be a problem, because obviously, if the value of the rupee goes down and you spend more rupees to buy more imported pulses and more imported edible oils, this will put a pressure on the prices.
Sure. There's no doubt that this depreciation will definitely follow through, will definitely feed into the inflation cycle.
No, but I think with a good monsoon, I expect that pulses and edible oils also may not be under so much of pressure as we were earlier.
Yeah, but the fact that the rupee has gone down will definitely lead to an inflation. To that extent, we have imported a depreciation of a currency essentially means that we are adjusting for the inflation differential with our trading partner. That is what an exchange rate variation is. So that means that India has imported that much of inflation from our partner. If a partner is lower inflation, sure, we do import lower inflation, but the point is we have imported, and that inflation will feed through into the cycle. So there is no doubt that from here on, they will be coming from the depreciated rupee. And that inflation will be something that will be an additional headache going ahead, especially because winters in India typically are periods of high inflation. It has always been every year. That's a normal part of our seasonal cycle. So we would definitely see going around till post-November, December, we would see a rise in prices. Also, this is an election year, so there will be an expenditure push that will come from any government that is there in election year. So that money that comes in will also be an additional spike in the inflation thing. We have started doing a very good thing, which is the DBT, the direct benefit transfer. That also means additional cash coming into the rural countryside. That also will be pulling into the inflation cycle. So inflation is going to be quite an interesting phenomena going up ahead.
But the question is, we can actually use this period also to export more of food grains. And that's something which can put down the pressure on the foreign exchange, which means that our oil imports, which are going to cost more, maybe we can actually be upset with that.
I'm not sure about the export of grain, primarily because of the fact that we have allowed about 170 to 175% rise in MSP from 2004 till now. That means we have effectively priced ourselves out of the international market. So our grain, both wheat and rice, we don't have much of an avenue to export. The prices are way ahead. So essentially these are going to be some things which limit the avenues, and that's what people talk about when they say the reforms are not happening or the government is not taking the right steps. That it's not a very great idea to see short-term responses to long-term structural problems. Probably it's better to hold on to gains, take the pain. Mr. Chidambaram a couple of days ago made a point that there has got to be a short-term pain, and there's no doubt about it. That pain will have to be gone through by the economy.
The Prime Minister also referred to India's public debt to GDP ratio. And we also know that the tax to GDP ratio has been falling. And this is a very serious problem. So how can you ensure that this area recovers?
This is only possible if there is growth. And that's what he has mentioned very clearly. Because when your growth goes down, naturally your tax collections go down. And your ability to tax further also goes down, because you will find that if you do that, the economy, especially already the growth is not expected to be this quarter, not more than 4.7%. And I think it's going to be much worse if we are going to have any more tightening of tax policies. And that's where the issue of long term, whether DTC and GSTs, how they will, but these are not going to be happening tomorrow. So I think there are no short fixes.
The Finance Minister has said also that there will be a lot of revenue collection changes that will take place.
Sure.
How do you think that is going to affect revenue collection?
Well, for one, he's sort of saying that I don't want any slippages in terms of these targets set. That is, of course, he needs it. He needs it badly, because disinvestment is going to slip. If everything goes to slip, then fiscal deficit at 4.8%, which is going to be his next target, will definitely be very difficult. Revenue collection changes. One of the major things that has been done is that service tax. They have tightened up the thing considerably. And that definitely does mean that they would be expecting service tax to do the trick this year. Our tax GDP ratio is about 10.8%. So it's not too bad, except that growth should give a bit of a, this year the growth is down, so we won't get much. How much we would be getting is a question of then additionality coming only from service tax. I don't see any other tax doing particularly great to make up for the shortage in excise as well as in customs.
Customs could be because it is possible because of let's take the devaluation of the rupee. So it's possible that you collect more.
Maybe.
In rupees.
So I would just like to quote the Prime Minister in conclusion. The Prime Minister says, we will need to ensure that the fundamentals of the economy remain strong so that India continues to grow at a healthy rate for many years to come. That we will ensure. He concedes we are no doubt faced with important challenges, but we have the capacity to address them. It is at times like these that the nation shows what it is truly capable of. I think that's entirely in the style of the Prime Minister, low-key but nevertheless confident and putting the best complexion on a difficult situation. Thank you very much, Rupee. Thank you very much, Mr. Raghuraman, for participating in this discussion.
You were listening to a discussion on current economic scenario. The participants were V. Raghuraman, former Secretary General ASSOCHAM, Shubhamaya Bhattacharjee, Deputy Editor, Indian Express, and Aditi Phadnis, Business Standard, who initiated and moderated the discussion. It came to you in the program Current Affairs, produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.